Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
Welcome to Sports Spectrum. I'm Jason Romano. Today's guest on the show is Alabama men's basketball coach Nate Oats. We're really excited to have you guys hear our conversation with Coach Oats. But before we do that, I want to tell you about our sponsorship with Compassion International. They have been great partners with us here at Sports Spectrum for a while now, over a year, and they are the most trusted child development ministry in the world. They provide children with hope. They provide children with a way out. And by doing that, they're connected to the local church with this child-based church sponsorship. And you and I can come in and make that difference for $38 a month. It's tax deductible. If you go to the website, compassion.com/sportsspectrum, you'll see a list of children waiting to be released from poverty. Kids from Rwanda, Tanzania, Ecuador, Bolivia, Ethiopia, Ghana, Honduras, children as young as 3 or 4 years old and as old as 16, 17 years old, waiting to be released from poverty. And your support for $38 a month will provide medical checkups, nutritious food, health and hygiene training, educational assistance, mentoring to help children discover their incredible value, and most important of all, the child who is sponsored will hear about the love of Jesus and be encouraged to develop a lifelong relationship with him. That's what it's all about. Help make that difference in a child's life by releasing them from poverty. Go to compassion.com/sportsspectrum, pray about it, and consider sponsoring a child today. Really excited to have Nate Oats, the Alabama men's basketball coach, on our program today. Nate is beginning his first season with the Alabama Crimson Tide after a very successful run with Buffalo, where he led them to 3 NCAA tournaments, including the second round of the NCAA tourney, both in 2018 and 2019. He won 3 MAC tournament championships in 16, 18, and 19, and is a 2-time MAC Coach of the Year. Nate Oats, Alabama men's basketball coach. He's got a great story. He grew up in Watertown, Wisconsin, and he was coaching high school ball just 6 years ago. Won a state championship, and now here he is in the SEC coaching the Alabama Crimson Tide in his first season. Take a listen to our conversation with Nate Oats here on Sports Spectrum's podcast. Coach Oats, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks for having me on. Glad to be on, Jason.
Absolutely. It's been 6 months or so since you've been in Alabama at the time we released this podcast and living, I guess, that roll tide life, as they call it, as their new head coach. How has the transition been for you coming to Tuscaloosa from Buffalo?
You know what? We like it down here. We like it a lot. My wife and daughters, my daughters found friends. They're in a good Christian school down here. My wife enjoys the South. It's a little warm in the summer, but we were fortunate enough. We found a house on the lake, so family likes to boat. We've been able to get out a little bit this summer, and we're really excited about working with our guys. I think we got a great staff, and we kind of hit the ground running. We're into 3 weeks into school, I think, down here. It's maybe 2 weeks into school now, but it's been a good transition. The family's moved down, our stuff's down, sold a house and bought. Everything's moving in the right direction.
Now, you were born and raised in Wisconsin, coached high school ball in Michigan, and then to Buffalo. So you see the trend there as someone who can acclimate themselves to cold weather. You don't have to deal with the snow anymore, Coach. How great is that?
Yeah, they tell me every few years you get an inch or so, and then it melts the next day. So I gave away my snowblower that I had since Wisconsin. I left a lot of snow sleds for our daughter's friends. No more sledding on a snow day off school. So that had been the tradition when I was a high school teacher. My oldest daughter, Lexi's 15. Every snow day, she went to the same district that I taught in Romulus when we were there. So every snow day, I'd take her out sledding. So I will have to find some new traditions down here. That won't be one of them.
You can sled on grass, I guess, right?
Yeah.
Tell me about that Southern hospitality. That's a real thing down in Alabama, isn't it?
Oh, shoot, they're great. They're real friendly. The couple months I was on the job, I put on about 20 pounds. Everybody wants to give you their greatest meal and their best dessert and their greatest fried foods. But they're super nice. The first night we got down here, we went to I've got an unbelievable AD, Greg Burns. Been great since I got here. A lot of people spoke highly of him. And then we flew down here that first night they hired me. And we went to his house. And I just remember my youngest one, Brielle's my 7-year-old. She just kept coming up to me talking about how friendly the people were here. And they are really friendly. And they continue to be friendly. They want to see you succeed, but they're genuinely trying to make life easier for you. So we enjoy that part of it for sure.
Take me back to about 6 years ago, and you're finishing up a high school state championship as a basketball coach, and like fast forwarding to where you are now in the SEC with Alabama coaching their basketball program and seeing God orchestrate all that for you. Is that something that you even dreamed about 6 years ago, that you'd be in the position that you're in now?
No, honestly, not really. When I first got into high school, I probably would have gone to any Division I school in the country. Then I started to figure the business out a little bit more. I had 18 kids that played for me at Romulus, go play Division I, and I learned stuff about it. And you see different buddies of yours that are assistants in Division I that have to move their families with young kids multiple times. I didn't want that for my family, so I'd said if I do get in, I just got to be with somebody I'm pretty convinced is going to be successful, to where we're not having to move, by getting fired. Like we would win, we'd get the option to move up if that, or stay. And I was fortunate, Coach Hurley, I really believed in him, and I got to know Bobby and Danny both, and their dad was a coach. So Bobby was a great boss to work for. We won. I was able to get the head job. Once I got into Division I, though, pretty quickly I was pretty convinced that I could be a head coach at the Division I level. And it's not that much different than being a high school coach, to be honest with you, Jason. It's still about relationships and getting kids to play hard. And, you've got more tools available to you to coach. And I was a math teacher, so I'm a big statistics guy in the analytics. And you can dive into a bunch more stuff with the video and that at this level. But when it all comes down to it, it's about motivating kids, getting them to play hard. And to me, there's not a whole lot of difference between high school and college in doing that.
What's the teachable moment for yourself that you can look back on, even in high school, maybe at Buffalo, that you can take with you now to Alabama and say, you know what, there were things that I didn't do well there. You had a lot of success, but there were things that I didn't do well, or I didn't do as well as I would like, that I would like to improve on coming to Alabama. What are some of those teachable things that you learned when you were there that you want to take with you now with Alabama?
Well, I think probably the biggest thing I've learned is, it deals with myself, with my staff, with our players, is the better man you are, the better human being, the higher character you have, the more likely it is you'll be successful at whatever you do. So as a high school coach, I worked extremely hard and put in a lot of time, and I looked out for my kids, but I felt like I let my wife and family down a little bit. I wasn't around as much as I need to. I put too much time, and I really think once I got my wife and kids more involved with this, and I became a better husband and father, I think it makes you a better coach, to be honest with you. You're a better man. You relate better to people. You learn how to communicate with people better, because you're working things. Your wife actually has valuable insight to add that I wasn't as open. Yeah, I wasn't as open to that before, because I didn't involve them as much as I should have. So now they're involved with what we do, and I like bringing them on road trips. My wife makes a lot of trips. My daughters make a lot of trips. I taken my oldest daughter on some recruiting trips where it's just me and her, and get some daddy-daughter time. So and we've become so convinced that high-character people involved in your program make a big difference, that I actually we had a part-time, we call him our mental skills coach at Buffalo. I don't know whether you call him a culture coach, a character coach, but Arnie's full-time with us. He literally doesn't hardly knows anything about basketball. He's full-time with us here at Alabama, just to really dive into the players' lives, and ministers to the coaches. We've got culture meetings every week with both the players and the staff, and I think it's important. I think it's important to to preach it. I think it's important to show it from the top, and I've learned a lot in that way for sure.
Yeah, we've worked with and had interviews with the guys from the nations of coaches and know about the character coaches that are placed in college basketball and how vital they are and how important they are, both to the coaches, but also to the players. That being said, let's learn about your faith a little bit, Coach. We've talked about it kind of briefly. We did a great article back in, I think, March in Sports Spectrum's website, sportspectrum.com. But let's hear your testimony a little bit. Can you share with us that faith testimony and when God kind of took shape in your life?
Yeah, for sure. I grew up in a Christian home. My father's got his PhD in theology. My mother and father, he was a teacher at a Baptist college, Maranatha Baptist University, where I went. So I grew up in the church, and my mother and father are both believers. And at 4 years old, I made a statement of faith. But as I got older, start to question it. How much did I really understand at 4? Am I really, I just had a lot of doubts, as I'm sure a lot of people do at times. And so at 16 years old, my sophomore year of high school, I really came face to face with God and really chose to dedicate my life to God and, accepted him as my Savior at that time. And there was a genuine peace that comes about you when you do that. But as I got older, you grow away sometimes. There's always periods of life where God brings you closer to him and periods where you let your flesh get in the way. And I just remember the biggest one in my life since I became a Christian at 16. And when I was 16, God definitely changed my life. I used to do prison ministry. We had a maximum security juvenile prison, 30 minutes from where I grew up. In college, I ran Bible studies weekly there. I wanted to be heavily involved with shaping kids' lives. But as I got older and basketball coaching, I did it in high school and I put a lot of time into it, but I felt like I started to grow a little bit away from it. And even more so with my wife and family, I just wasn't the father and husband I needed to be. And then my wife got cancer my first year as a head coach at Buffalo, so 4 years ago.
Yeah.
And there were circumstances surrounding that I really had to make some decisions as to whether, I wanted to be the Christian man that I said I was, or whether I wanted to be a hypocritical, and I didn't want that. I wanted to be, so I really, in the last 4 years, 3.5 years or so, really, I don't want to say turn up, but I really had a lot of introspection to where you really evaluate where you're at as a man and what you want. And I really want my children to know me as a Christian father that demonstrates what it means to be a Christian to them. My wife can turn to me as the head of the house and really trust me as a Christian husband and father leading our family. And I think kind of had a little bit of a wake-up call. I think in various parts of your life, sometimes you need wake-up calls, and God allows certain things to happen for a reason. And I think there were circumstances surrounding her cancer and what she went through and what we went through as a family that's kind of got us back on the path I want to be on. Yeah,
I read a quote just in doing research, obviously, for the interview from your wife in 2015. She said, it was in an article I read, I think it was from a Buffalo periodical, and she said, if God's in control of my life, then he won't let anything happen to me that he doesn't want to. So that just takes a lot of the stress out. Obviously, I know that your wife's doing well now and doing better, but how much did that encourage you to hear somebody like your wife battling and fighting and saying, you know what, whatever God's will is, that's what I'm good with? And that's a hard thing to accept and walk through as a believer, isn't it?
Oh, no, it's very hard. And I mean, even now, we just heard a great sermon. We're visiting churches down here in Alabama trying to find the right fit for us. But it's, the pastor gave a great sermon on why does God allow certain things to happen. And,
yeah,
we firmly believe God's allowed us to go through certain things to help other believers, that go through similar circumstances. So Crystal's always been strong. She's been a rock. I mean, she showed what a fighter she is through her whole battle with cancer and everything after, and just getting our family back to the way we wanted it to be. That I got a lot of respect for her. I'm certainly glad I married her. I definitely wouldn't be where I'm at right now if it wasn't for her. And she's a large part of our success. I say our as in the whole program. I mean, my assistants that came with me from Buffalo knows what a great woman she is. She was great up there, and she's been through a lot. And it's, we're fortunate that God chose to spare her life, and she's been cancer-free for 3.5 years now. We're rejoicing with that, and we look forward to what God's got in store for us in the future.
It's great. Nate Oats is our coach here, or is our guest here. He's the Alabama men's basketball coach, and this is Sports Spectrum. Coach, take me through how your faith shapes the way that you create a culture within your locker room, the way that you coach, the way that you lead. How does that faith shape it? Obviously, you got to be careful because you're not hired to be a preacher. You're hired to be a coach, but yet your faith has to shape you, I would imagine, in some way, in the way that you go and create that culture. What does that look like for you?
No, it definitely does. I mean, if you're a true believer, your faith permeates every aspect of your life. So yeah. I'm nowhere close to being perfect, as none of us are. I've made plenty of mistakes. I make mistakes as a coach, but you know what? When I do, maybe I'm too harsh with a player. Maybe my patience wore a little thin. I owe him an apology, and I apologize and explain that I'm a man just like him. I'm going to make mistakes, and it is. But we've got. So I sat down with Arnie, our mental skills coach, and our staff at Buffalo about 3 years ago, and we came up with a culture playbook, and we came up with 3 core values. And this is based a lot on what Tim Kite, who worked at Ohio State with Urban Meyer. And Tim Kite was a pastor before in his life. He's not anymore, but he really kind of helped me through this. I wouldn't say his book and reading that, and then I heard his son Brian Kite speak to the football staff of Buffalo. But when we created our culture playbook, it was, we thought long and hard about what we wanted our culture to be and how we're going to get it to where we want it to be. So our 3 core values are max effort, and you obviously got to go hard in whatever you do, and that includes our social life, our spiritual life, and we talk about our players being healthy in all aspects of their life. Whether it's physical, mental, relational, spiritual, like Arnie talks about all that with our players when he meets on culture meetings. But so we're going to give max effort in all areas of our life. And then continuous growth's another one. We're going to get better. We're going to be better men. We're going to be better players every day, better than we were the day before. And if you have some mistakes and go backwards, then we deal with it. So it's max effort, continuous growth. Then the last one is selfless love, and we teach our players how to, love each other in a manly, godly way, and you hold each other accountable. If your teammate's doing something he shouldn't be doing off the court, you hold them accountable. If you really love them, you're not going to let them go back to the dorm and smoke weed or, whatever it may be that they're struggling with. We all have our different struggles in life that we struggle with, but
yeah.
If you love your brother on the court, you're also going to make sure he gives max effort every day, because that's what's best for him. It's what's best for us as a program. And, we love our players and teach them what it means to love each other, to love the community, reach out in community outreach. But those are our 3 core values, and we preach them all the time, practice off the court, on the court. So I think, and if you go through each of those, there's biblical principles backing every one of those up. I mean, we don't, like you said, I'm at a public university. We don't require our guys to do anything that they're not comfortable doing. We don't require church service, any of that. But I also, at the same time, I do make sure when we do practice Sundays that it's later in the day to where everybody could go to church, whatever their belief is, whatever denomination they would be. But I think there's biblical principles that guide my life, that should guide each person's life, really. And we preach those, whether we use a scripture verse with them or not. They're solid principles you should live your life by.
Last couple questions here with Nate Oats on the podcast. I ask this question a lot to coaches, and I love to hear the different answers, because you do a lot of feeding and pouring into others, your assistants, your players, other people, certainly your wife and your kids as a dad. But who pours into you? You mentioned your character coach. I'm guessing he does, but who pours into you, and how do you stay fed on a consistent basis spiritually, we'll say, but also just as a person who's consistently pouring out and pouring into others? How do you stay fed?
No, that's a great question, and it's a great point to bring up, because I think it's important that people understand you need people in your life that do feed into you. And I think, when I gotten wayward in my life, I think you haven't had those people. So I think it's important. The latest, when I went through the cancer fight with my wife, and we really, as a family, came to, some hard questions and went through some tough times together. I'll say I had some family reach out, and I've got a brother-in-law, got one brother and two sisters. I really think, they came pretty close. I had my brother-in-laws and my brother came in. My father's obviously got a lot of wisdom, and I won't say I speak to him frequently on a daily basis like that, but when I need advice, he's there, and he's a man of the word, and he's always been a godly figure to me. But the people that are with me on a daily basis that I see physically, like I've got, like I told you, Arnie, our mental skills coach / culture coach, whatever you want to call him now, is good. But we also down here, we've got FCA chaplain, or Scotty Hollins. I guess he's not technically with FCA, but I think he's associated with. We've got a chaplain here that'll ask you questions, that comes in to meet with our players one-on-one some, and then I've got some staff members that are believers that work with me that we kind of hold each other accountable to. And I'll say this, just last year was the first time since college, and I'm ashamed to say it, but it's the first time since college that I read through the Bible from front to cover in 1 year. Like, I had to do it for Bible courses in college, and I plan to make it more of a practice. This year I'm going through more of a with my family, my wife, my sisters and brother-in-laws. Like, my parents were reading through kind of a devotional book that as you pray for your kids.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. But I'm going to go back. I want to read through the Bible different ways. Our chaplain down here is going through it with our guys on a chronological basis. I'd like to do that in the future. But when I did it last year, I had a couple old college teammates of mine that kind of held me accountable going through it. We just check in with each other on a daily basis. Actually, I had two guys. One was an old college teammate, and then one was a guy that I went to high school with, that we just kind of, hey, let's read through the Bible and let's hold each other accountable. And we did that, and I made it through, and you learn a lot. I mean, it's why I'd like to continue to do it more, where you're in the Word every day and you are reading through the Bible on a yearly basis.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I've been a believer now, I think 17 years, and I just read through the Bible for the first time, the entire Bible in a year, a couple years ago too, and it just gave me discipline to kind of stay in the Word every day. What did that do for you, reading through that Bible in a full year at this stage of life for you?
It was great. I mean, there's stories that I hadn't read about since I was a kid. I went to Christian school and stuff, and then God's got a way of speaking to you when you read it, and then what you need at that time comes through, and it was good. I did a plan where you're reading from 4 different spots, so you're not getting bogged down with some of the minutiae in the Old Testament every day. You're reading 2 New Testament, 2 Old Testament passages, and then it was 25 days a month. So if you did get behind a little bit, you had the last, depending on how long the month was, but the last 5-6 days of the month to kind of catch up, and it allowed you to stay on track. And I really enjoyed it. So, like I said, we're doing a little bit something different this year, but I'd like to, go back to different plans. Like the chronological plan interests me. I'd like to just you get reminded of stuff that you haven't heard for years. If you haven't read it in a devotional or heard it in the sermon, there's stuff, stories where God worked in different ways that you haven't thought about, read about for years. And that brings it all up when you read through it in a year. So I thought it was great.
Absolutely. Coach, thanks so much for your time. Last question here. We ask this to all of our guests on the podcast. What is the Lord teaching you today in the season of life that he has you in? What are you learning from God right now?
God's fully in control. Like you want to try, and especially in my job, you want to control a lot. You think you have control over a lot of different areas. You got bigger staff here working under you, a little bit more, a few more eyes on you as you do your job, and you want to make sure everything's right and you're controlling it. At the end of the day, we can only control so much, and I need to focus on what I can control and not worry about everything else. God's in control of everything else. If God wants something to come into your life, whether it's a trial, whether it's a blessing, it's going to happen. If not, it wasn't meant to be. So I worrying a lot less about things I have no control over, and let's control what we can control and pray about everything else, and pray that God's will be done and God's will be done.
That's great stuff there. He is Nate Oats, the Alabama men's basketball coach. Really appreciate your time, Coach, for coming on the podcast. And listen, we're really excited to watch this upcoming season and see how Alabama does, and just wishing you nothing but the best. Thanks for your time.
Thanks, Jason. Appreciate you having me on. Take care.
Great stuff there from Nate Oats, the Alabama men's basketball coach. And it's almost that time. College basketball about a month away from starting here. It's October 2019, and excited to watch Coach Oats and this Alabama team and see what they can accomplish in the SEC. Alabama has never been to an NCAA Final Four, and it would be quite the accomplishment if Coach Oats could bring that team to that national prominence that I know that they've seen in football and they're hoping to see in college basketball as well. And Nate Oats is a great guy. Give him a follow on Twitter at Nate_Oats, O-A-T-S, head basketball coach at the University of Alabama. Many thanks to Coach Oats, and many thanks to you for listening. We appreciate you checking us out on social media, subscribing and downloading to this podcast, leaving reviews, everything that you can do to help get the word out for Sports Spectrum and what we stand for, the intersection of sports and faith. We so would appreciate it. So go to the website, sportspectrum.com. Check us out on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, all of those places. Like us there, retweet, and share this podcast if you have a moment to just let people know about these stories on the intersection of sports and faith. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time with a brand new episode here on Sports Spectrum. Have a great rest of your day.